August 21st, 1944. The morning mist clung to the hedgerows near Chambois, France. Sergeant Tommy Atkins of the 3rd Royal Tank Regiment peered through his 17-pounder's telescopic sight, watching the distinctive silhouette of a Panther tank emerge from the tree line, 800 yards distant. The German crew, confident in their sloped armour that had deflected countless Allied shells, began their methodical advance across the open ground. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. What the Panther crew didn't know was that they were about to encounter a weapon system that would fundamentally alter their understanding of invulnerability. The 17-pounder anti-tank gun, with its armour-piercing, discarding sabot rounds, possessed penetrating power that German metallurgists had deemed theoretically impossible for a gun of its calibre. In the next 30 seconds, tungsten would meet steel in a collision that would shatter not just armour plate, but the psychological foundation of German tank doctrine. The story of how British engineers created a weapon that could reliably destroy Panthers at ranges exceeding 1,000 yards begins not in the workshops of Royal Ordnance, but in the desperate calculations of 1941, when British tank crews faced German armour they could not penetrate, and a military establishment that refused to acknowledge the scope of their disadvantage. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. In early 1942, the British Army faced a crisis that threatened to render their entire armoured doctrine obsolete. German tank development had accelerated beyond anything Allied intelligence had predicted. The Panzer Mark IV Special, with its long-barreled 75mm gun and improved armour, could destroy British tanks at ranges where British guns could not penetrate German armour in return. British intelligence reports from North Africa painted an increasingly grim picture. The 2-pounder gun that armed most British tanks could not penetrate German frontal armour at any practical range. Even the 6-pounder, rushed into production as an interim solution, struggled against improved German armour schemes. Tank crews reported round after round simply bouncing off German glacis plates, while return fire from German guns proved devastatingly effective. The mathematics were brutal and undeniable. A Panzer Mark IV could engage British tanks at 1,500 yards with reasonable expectation of penetration. British tanks needed to close to within 300 yards for their guns to be effective against German frontal armour. This tactical disadvantage cost lives, battles, and threatened to undermine British armoured operations entirely. Colonel Dennis Burney of the Armaments Design Department recognised that incremental improvements would not solve the fundamental problem. British tanks needed a gun capable of defeating current and anticipated German armour at ranges that preserved British tactical flexibility. The solution required abandoning conventional wisdom about the relationship between gun calibre and anti-tank effectiveness. The 17-pounder project began in September 1941, with specifications that seemed impossibly ambitious. The new gun must penetrate 130mm of armour at 1,000 yards. It must fit within existing tank turrets without major redesign. It must achieve this performance using available materials and manufacturing techniques that could support mass production. Traditional artillery design suggested these requirements were mutually contradictory. A gun powerful enough to penetrate heavy armour at long range would be too large for tank installation. A gun small enough for tank mounting could not achieve the required penetrating power. British engineers were being asked to violate the fundamental physics of ballistics. The breakthrough came through understanding that penetrating power depended not just on projectile weight and velocity, but on the concentration of kinetic energy at the point of impact. Captain Charles Dennistown Burney, working with a team of metallurgists and ballistics experts, developed the armour-piercing discarding sabot round that would transform 17-pounder effectiveness. The sabot round consisted of a tungsten carbide sub-projectile, surrounded by a lightweight aluminum carrier that fell away after leaving the barrel. This design allowed a relatively small gun to fire a dense, high-velocity penetrator that concentrated enormous kinetic energy into a small impact area. The physics were elegant, and the results would prove revolutionary. Testing began at the proof and experimental establishment at Shoeburyness in early 1942. The first successful firing of a 17-pounder sabot round occurred on March 15, 1942, penetrating 140 millimeters of armor plate at 1,000 yards. British engineers had achieved what German ballistics experts considered impossible. The implications extended far beyond technical achievement. For the first time since 1940, British forces would possess a weapon capable of engaging German armor on favorable terms. Tank crews who had felt outgunned and vulnerable could approach engagements with confidence. The psychological impact on both British and German forces would prove as significant as the technical capability itself. Production of the 17-pounder began in May 1942, with the first guns reaching frontline units in January 1943. Initial deployment focused on towed anti-tank guns rather than tank-mounted versions, as fitting the weapon into existing turrets required extensive redesign work that delayed tank applications until late 1943. The Achilles tank destroyer, based on the American M10 chassis but armed with the British 17-pounder, entered service in August 1943. This vehicle combined the mobility needed for aggressive tank hunting with firepower that could defeat any German armor then in service. British crews finally possessed a weapon that could engage Panthers and Tigers with reasonable expectation of success. The first major engagement involving 17-pounder equipped units occurred during Operation Goodwood in July 1944. British armoured divisions, spearheaded by Achilles tank destroyers and 17-pounder anti-tank guns, engaged German armour in the largest tank battle British forces had fought since El Alamein. The results demonstrated both the weapon's capabilities and its limitations under combat conditions. On July 18, 1944, during the initial phases of Goodwood, Achilles tank destroyers from the Guards Armoured Division engaged Panthers from the 21st Panzer Division at ranges exceeding 800 yards. Contemporary unit reports documented multiple Panther kills achieved with sabot ammunition, confirming the weapon's theoretical performance under battlefield conditions. German after-action reports from the same engagement revealed growing concern about British anti-tank capabilities. Panther crews, who had grown accustomed to engaging Allied armour with near impunity, found themselves vulnerable to weapons they had not previously considered threatening. The psychological impact on German tank crews proved immediate and significant. Tank commander Hans Bolter of the 21st Panzer Division recorded in his diary entry for July 19, 1944, that British anti-tank guns were achieving penetrations at ranges previously considered safe. His unit had lost 3 Panthers to what appeared to be long-range British fire, forcing tactical changes that emphasized cover and concealment over aggressive maneuvering. The technical specifications that made 17-pounder effectiveness possible reflected sophisticated understanding of ballistics and metallurgy. The gun fired a standard high-explosive round weighing 17 pounds, giving the weapon its designation, but its anti-tank capability came from the armor-piercing discarding sabot round weighing only 7¼ pounds. The sabot round achieved a muzzle velocity of 2,950 feet per second, compared to 2,550 feet per second for conventional armor-piercing rounds. This 400 foot per second velocity increase translated directly into penetrating power through the kinetic energy equation that governs armor penetration. At 1,000 yards, the 17-pounder sabot round could penetrate 160 millimeters of armor at 30 degrees obliquity. Against the Panther's 80mm glacis plate, sloped at 55 degrees, creating an effective thickness of approximately 140 millimeters. This meant reliable penetration at ranges up to 1,200 yards under favorable conditions. The tungsten carbide sub-projectile that provided this performance required strategic materials that were in critically short supply. Each sabot round contained approximately 1½ pounds of tungsten carbide, meaning full-scale production consumed hundreds of tons of this scarce metal annually. Britain imported tungsten primarily from China and Portugal, both sources vulnerable to disruption by enemy action. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. British tungsten allocation involved complex calculations, balancing anti-tank ammunition production against competing military and industrial needs. Machine tools, armor plate hardening, and aircraft engine components all required tungsten, creating ongoing tension between immediate battlefield requirements and long-term industrial capacity. The Royal Ordnance Factory at Woolwich, responsible for 17-pounder production, operated under constant pressure to increase output while maintaining quality standards that ensured reliability under combat conditions. Quality control testing revealed that approximately 8% of sabot rounds failed to meet penetration specifications, requiring extensive testing and rejection protocols that further reduced available ammunition. By September 1944, British forces in northwest Europe possessed sufficient 17-pounder guns to influence tactical operations meaningfully, though never enough to fully equip all units requiring anti-tank capability. The 79th Armoured Division, specialised in providing support for infantry operations, received priority allocation of 17-pounder equipped vehicles. The Firefly tank, essentially a Sherman tank modified to mount the 17-pounder gun, began reaching frontline units in significant numbers during preparations for Operation Overlord. British doctrine called for one Firefly per troop of 4 tanks, providing each unit with at least one vehicle capable of engaging heavy German armour effectively. Tank crews required extensive training to master the 17-pounder's capabilities and limitations. The gun's high velocity and flat trajectory demanded different ranging techniques compared to previous British tank guns. The sabot round's ballistic characteristics differed significantly from high-explosive rounds, requiring gunners to maintain proficiency with multiple ammunition types. Sergeant William Thompson of the 3rd Royal Tank Regiment, who served as gunner on a Firefly during the Normandy campaign, later recalled the dramatic difference, 17-pounder, capability made to crew confidence. Before receiving the Firefly, his troop avoided engagement with German heavy tanks whenever possible. With the 17-pounder, they actively sought such engagements. The tactical implications of 17-pounder deployment extended beyond individual tank versus tank engagements. German armour doctrine, which had emphasized aggressive maneuvering based on superior firepower and armor protection, required fundamental revision when facing weapons that could defeat Panthers and Tigers at long range. German tank commanders who had grown accustomed to dominating battlefield areas through superior equipment found themselves forced into defensive postures, using terrain and concealment to avoid engagement rather than seeking advantageous positions for attack. This tactical shift reduced German armour effectiveness, even when mechanical superiority remained intact. Intelligence reports from captured German officers revealed growing awareness of British anti-tank improvements and their impact on German tactical thinking. Hauptmann Friedrich Decker, captured during operations near Köln in August 1944, acknowledged during interrogation that British guns had achieved unexpected effectiveness against German armour. The production statistics that supported 17-pounder deployment reflected Britain's industrial capacity under wartime conditions. The Royal Ordnance Factory system produced approximately 2,700 17-pounder guns during 1944, along with over 60,000 sabot rounds and 300,000 conventional rounds. This production rate, while impressive by British standards, remained insufficient to meet demand from all units requiring anti-tank capability. Priority allocation systems ensured that the most critical formations received adequate equipment, but many infantry divisions and armoured reconnaissance units continued operating with less capable weapons throughout the war. American industrial support proved crucial for 17-pounder effectiveness. The United States provided Sherman tank chassis for Firefly conversion and supplied tungsten concentrates that supplemented British imports. This collaboration enabled 17-pounder production at levels that would have been impossible using purely British resources. The Lend-Lease arrangements that facilitated American support reflected broader Allied cooperation in weapons development and production. British 17-pounder technology influenced American tank destroyer development, while American manufacturing techniques improved British production efficiency for specialized ammunition. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. The battlefield debut of Sabot ammunition during Operation Totalize in August 1944 demonstrated both the potential and limitations of 17-pounder technology under large-scale combat conditions. Canadian and British armoured units, equipped with Firefly tanks and Achilles tank destroyers, engaged German armour in the most intensive fighting since the Normandy breakout began. On August 7, 1944, during the initial assault phase of Totalize, Firefly tanks from the 4th Canadian Armoured Division engaged Panthers and Tiger tanks from the 12th SS Panzer Division at ranges exceeding 1,000 yards. Unit records documented 17 confirmed German tank kills, achieved with Sabot ammunition during the first day of operations. The effectiveness of these long-range engagements forced immediate tactical adaptations by German commanders. SS Oberfuhrer Kurt Meyer, commanding the 12th SS Panzer Division, issued orders requiring his tank crews to avoid open ground during daylight hours and to engage Allied armour only from carefully prepared positions that offered immediate concealment after firing. These defensive measures, while reducing German tank losses, also reduced German tactical effectiveness by limiting the aggressive manoeuvring that had characterized German armor doctrine. Panzer units that had previously dominated battlefield areas through mobility and firepower found themselves constrained to static defensive positions. British reconnaissance reports from the same period noted decreased German armor activity during daylight hours and reduced willingness to engage in sustained tank versus tank combat. German tanks that had previously pressed attacks despite taking casualties began withdrawing after initial contact, suggesting declining confidence in their armor protection. The psychological impact on German tank crews extended beyond immediate tactical considerations to broader questions about equipment superiority and battlefield dominance. Crews who had entered combat confident in their technological advantages found themselves vulnerable to weapons they had not previously respected. Lieutenant Klaus Weber, a Panther commander with the 21st Panzer Division, was captured during fighting near Falaise in August 1944. During intelligence debriefing, he expressed surprise at British anti-tank effectiveness, noting that his crew had been forced to retreat from positions they would have held confidently earlier in the war. The technical analysis that explained 17-pounder effectiveness revealed fundamental principles about armor penetration that influenced subsequent weapon development. The concentration of kinetic energy achieved through Sabot technology demonstrated that conventional relationships between gun caliber and anti-tank capability no longer applied under modern conditions. British ballistics experts, analysing combat performance data from Normandy operations, confirmed that Sabot rounds achieved penetration percentages that exceeded pre-war theoretical calculations. Against Panther frontal armour, Sabot rounds penetrated successfully in 87% of hits at ranges between 800 and 1,000 yards. These penetration rates, achieved under combat conditions rather than controlled testing, validated the design principles that had guided 17-pounder development. The weapon had achieved its intended purpose of providing British forces with anti-tank capability comparable to German equipment. The strategic implications of 17-pounder deployment extended beyond immediate battlefield effectiveness to questions about industrial capacity and technological competition. British engineers had successfully developed and produced a weapon system that challenged German technical superiority in armoured warfare. This achievement occurred despite Britain's limited industrial resources and competing demands from multiple military programs. The success demonstrated that focused research and development efforts could overcome apparent material disadvantages through intelligent application of scientific knowledge and engineering expertise. German intelligence reports from late 1944 acknowledged British achievements in anti-tank technology, while noting Germany's declining ability to respond with improved armour or weapons. Material shortages and production priorities focused on fighter aircraft left little capacity for major tank development programs. The post-war analysis, conducted by British and American technical intelligence teams, revealed the full scope of 17-pounder impact on German armour doctrine and tactical thinking. Interrogation of captured German officers and examination of unit records confirmed that British anti-tank improvements had forced significant changes in German operational planning. German tank units, which had previously operated with aggressive confidence based on equipment superiority, adopted increasingly defensive postures designed to minimize exposure to British anti-tank fire. This tactical shift reduced German armour effectiveness even when numerical and technical advantages remained intact. The lessons learned from 17-pounder combat employment influenced British armour doctrine throughout the remainder of the war and into the post-war period. The weapon demonstrated that anti-tank capability could be achieved through specialised ammunition rather than larger guns, enabling effective weapons to be mounted on smaller, more mobile platforms. This principle guided British tank destroyer development during the final years of the war and influenced the design of post-war armoured vehicles. The emphasis on ammunition effectiveness, rather than gun size, became a fundamental aspect of British armour doctrine during the Cold War period. The Centurion tank, which entered development during 1943 and became Britain's primary main battle tank after the war, incorporated 17-pounder technology in its initial design. Later versions used improved guns, but the basic principle of achieving anti-tank effectiveness through specialised ammunition remained central to British thinking. Soviet armour development, observed through intelligence reports and post-war technical exchange, followed remarkably similar paths in recognizing that ammunition technology could provide anti-tank capability more efficiently than proportional increases in gun caliber. The global armour community had reached similar conclusions about the relationship between kinetic energy and penetrating power. The industrial legacy of 17-pounder production extended beyond immediate military applications to broader questions about precision manufacturing and quality control under wartime conditions. The tungsten carbide sub-projectiles required manufacturing tolerances that challenged British industrial capabilities. Royal Ordnance factories developed new production techniques and quality control methods to ensure sabot round reliability. These manufacturing improvements influenced post-war industrial development, particularly in precision machining and metallurgical applications requiring extremely tight tolerances. The skilled workforce that produced 17-pounder ammunition represented a significant investment in technical education and training that benefited British industry long after the war ended. Workers who learned precision machining and quality control techniques for military production applied these skills to civilian manufacturing during post-war reconstruction. The international collaboration that supported 17-pounder development demonstrated the advantages of Allied cooperation in weapons research and development. British theoretical work combined with American industrial capacity and raw materials to produce results that neither nation could have achieved independently. This collaborative model influenced post-war defense cooperation between Britain and the United States, establishing patterns of technology sharing and joint development that continued throughout the Cold War period. The NATO standardization agreements that emerged during the 1950s reflected lessons learned about the benefits of Allied cooperation in weapons development. The combat veterans who served with 17-pounder equipped units carried forward tactical lessons that influenced British armour doctrine for decades. Officers who learned to exploit the weapon's long-range capabilities became advocates for similar approaches in subsequent equipment development. Major General George Roberts, who commanded the 11th Armoured Division during operations in northwest Europe, consistently emphasized the importance of superior anti-tank capability in his post-war writings about armoured warfare. His advocacy influenced British tank development during the 1950s and 60s. The technical documentation that recorded 17-pounder development and combat employment provided a detailed case study in weapon system design and deployment under wartime conditions. These records influenced post-war defence planning and became reference material for subsequent British weapons programmes. The comprehensive testing and evaluation procedures developed for sabot ammunition established standards for quality control and performance verification that British ordnance factories continued using for decades after the war ended. The institutional knowledge gained through 17-pounder production influenced British defence manufacturing throughout the Cold War period. By November 1944, British forces in northwest Europe possessed anti-tank capability that fundamentally altered the tactical balance of armoured warfare. German tank crews, who had operated with confidence based on armour superiority, found themselves vulnerable to weapons that could defeat their protection at ranges that prevented effective return fire. The psychological transformation of British tank crews proved equally significant. Units that had avoided engagement with German heavy tanks whenever possible began actively seeking such encounters, confident in their ability to achieve favourable outcomes through superior firepower and tactical positioning. This shift in tactical psychology, enabled by 17-pounder effectiveness, influenced every subsequent armoured engagement in the European theatre. British crews approached tank versus tank combat with aggression and confidence that had been absent during the early years of the war, when equipment disadvantages forced defensive thinking. The final phase of operations in northwest Europe, from the crossing of the Rhine through the German surrender in May 1945, demonstrated the cumulative impact of British anti-tank improvements on German armour doctrine and effectiveness. German tank units, constrained by fuel shortages and declining crew quality, could no longer rely on equipment superiority to offset other disadvantages. Allied intelligence analysis of German tank losses during the final months of the war revealed that mechanical failures and fuel shortages caused more vehicle losses than direct combat. However, the combat losses that did occur showed a disproportionate number of penetrations through frontal armour, suggesting that German crews could no longer position their vehicles to exploit armour advantages effectively. The 17-pounder had achieved its intended strategic purpose of neutralising German armour superiority through superior anti-tank capability. British forces entered the final phase of the war with confidence in their ability to defeat German armour under any reasonable tactical circumstances. The post-war evaluation of 17-pounder effectiveness confirmed that specialised ammunition technology could overcome apparent disadvantages in gun calibre and platform size. This lesson influenced British defence planning throughout the Cold War period and established principles that continued affecting British weapons development into the 21st century. Modern British armour doctrine, expressed through Challenger tank development and employment, reflects direct continuity with lessons learned from 17-pounder combat experience. The emphasis on ammunition effectiveness, long-range engagement capability, and crew confidence remains central to British thinking about armoured warfare. The tungsten carbide sub-projectile that gave the 17-pounder its penetrating power established design principles that continue influencing modern armour-piercing ammunition. Current British tank ammunition uses depleted uranium or tungsten alloy penetrators, chosen for essentially identical density and hardness properties that made tungsten carbide effective during World War II. August 21, 1944, when Sergeant Tommy Atkins first engaged a Panther with 17-pounder sabot ammunition near Chambois, marked a genuine turning point in the psychological balance of armoured warfare. German crews who had fought confidently behind their sloped armour learned that British guns could pose a lethal threat at ranges they had considered safe. British crews who had felt outmatched by German equipment gained meaningful confidence from knowing they possessed weapons that could defeat Panthers and Tigers under favourable circumstances. This transformation in tactical psychology, enabled by tungsten carbide ammunition produced in British factories, influenced every subsequent armoured engagement of the European war. The 17-pounder, though never available in desired quantities, provided sufficient improved capability to transform British tank crews from cautious defenders into aggressive attackers willing to engage German armour directly. The crews who fired those first sabot rounds in combat, watching tungsten carbide punch through armour that had seemed impenetrable, demonstrated that scientific knowledge applied intelligently to urgent tactical problems could overcome seemingly insurmountable technical disadvantages. This fundamental lesson, learned at considerable cost on battlefields across Europe, remains directly relevant for military planners facing the technological challenges of modern warfare. The balance between armour protection and anti-tank capability continues evolving through the same principles of kinetic energy concentration and material science that made the 17-pounder effective against Panther tanks in 1944. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.